In 2023, a viral hoax did what 17 years of investigation could not. It exposed the deepest contradiction of the McCann family. When Julia Wendell emerged claiming to be Madeleine, the reaction of parents who spent millions searching for their daughter was not hope, but paralyzing panic. A deafening silence that shouted louder than any press release. That reaction wasn't about a confused Polish girl. It was about a trigger. A trigger that reignited the original fear from that night in 2007. Because their panic reveals an uncomfortable truth, their greatest fear wasn't that Julia was lying, but that the attention she generated might, accidentally, stumble upon the truth. The truth about what really happened in apartment 5A. Julia's hoax in the end wasn't a distraction. It was the key. The key that allows us to decode the McCann's behavior and understand why, for them, the possibility of finding Madeleine became the greatest threat of all. And the reason for that doesn't lie in Poland, but in the family secret they've been protecting for nearly 2 decades. To understand the panic of 2023, we need to return to the epicenter of the trauma. Apartment 5A, on the night of May 3rd, 2007. The official narrative, we all know it. Kate and Jerry McCann dine with friends 50 meters away, while their 3 young children sleep in an unlocked apartment. Around 10 p.m., Kate goes to check on the children and finds Madeleine's bed empty and the bedroom window open. Her scream, "They've taken her," launches the biggest missing person case in modern history. But beneath this story lies a second narrative, an undercurrent of inconsistencies that begins to flow that very night. The first and most glaring is the parents' reaction. Reports from resort staff and the McCann's own friends in the Tapas 7 describe a couple strangely restrained, almost catatonic. Where one would expect frantic desperation, a crazed search of the surroundings, witnesses describe a disturbing calm. Jerry McCann, instead of running along the beach, shouting his daughter's name, focused on calling the British media. Kate, according to reports, oscillated between tears and an icy composure, refusing to answer direct questions from the first police officers to arrive. This behavior isn't that of grieving parents. It's the behavior of people in shock, yes, but a different kind of shock. It's the shock of someone who lost control of a situation. Trauma theory teaches us about the fight, flight, or freeze response. The McCann's reaction that night wasn't fight, wasn't search. It was freeze, a paralysis that arises when the threat is not just external, but internal. The main conflict in the McCann case was never parents versus an abductor. It was the parents' narrative versus the evidence, and contradictory evidence began piling up from the first minute. The bedroom window, supposedly used by the abductor, was intact, with no signs of forced entry, and could only be fully opened from the inside. The testimony of Jane Tanner, one of the friends who claimed to have seen a man carrying a child, changed multiple times and only became credible after hypnosis sessions. The apartment itself wasn't secured. Friends and staff came and went, contaminating a crime scene that, perhaps conveniently, could never be properly analyzed. The inciting incident wasn't Madeleine's disappearance. It was the creation of a hoax to cover up what really happened. The conflict isn't the search for a child, but the desperate maintenance of a story that began to crumble the moment it was told. The family secret didn't emerge when Madeleine vanished. It was born when her parents decided how they would tell the world she was gone. In the months that followed, the McCann's PR machine, funded by millions in donations, went into action. They became untouchable. Any journalist who dared question the official version was sued. Any police officer who got too close to the truth was discredited. The Portuguese detective Gonçalo Amaral, who led the initial investigation and dared to name the parents as suspects, was removed from the case and had his career destroyed after publishing a book with his theory. The message was clear: do not cross this line. But the truth, like water, always finds a crack to seep through. And the biggest crack in the McCann's dam came in the form of 2 British dogs, Eddie and Keela, specialists in detecting cadaver odor and human blood. Brought to Portugal months after the disappearance, these dogs, with over 95% accuracy, delivered the most chilling scene of the entire investigation. Inside apartment 5A, Eddie, the cadaver dog, barked frantically at a specific spot behind the sofa in the living room. Then in the parents' bedroom. Keela, the blood dog, confirmed the alerts. But the real turning point came in the resort's parking lot. The dogs were presented with dozens of cars, including the Renault Scenic the McCanns rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. As they approached the car, the dog's behavior changed drastically. Eddie barked incessantly at the driver's door and the trunk. Keela did the same, indicating the presence of blood. Cadaver odor, experts say, can transfer through clothing or hair to a new environment, even weeks later. The implication was clear and terrifying. Something or someone with the smell of death had been in that car. The McCanns' reaction to this evidence was revealing. They didn't offer help. They attacked. They discredited the dogs, questioned the science, accused the Portuguese police of planting evidence. It was the first time their panic became visible to the world. It wasn't the fear of an abductor, on the loose. It was the fear of a science they couldn't control, a truth they couldn't litigate away. The dogs had no agenda. They couldn't be intimidated. They simply reacted to a biological fact. And the fact they pointed to was that death had been present in that apartment. The dogs' evidence led the Portuguese police to do the unthinkable. On September 7, 2007, Kate and Jerry McCann were officially named arguidos, or formal suspects, in their daughter's disappearance. This was the point of no return. The victim parents' mask had cracked publicly, and the narrative they controlled with an iron grip was collapsing. Kate McCann's interrogation that day is a case study in the psychology of deception. For 11 hours, she refused to answer 48 direct questions based on the new evidence. Questions like, why didn't you search for your daughter that night? Why was cadaver odor found on your clothes and in the car you rented weeks later? What happened in apartment 5A? For all of them, the response was the same. I'm not going to answer. This silence isn't that of a wrongfully accused mother. It's the strategic silence of someone who knows any response, any attempt at explanation, would only create more contradictions. It's what interrogation experts call passive defense. When you have no plausible explanation for the evidence, the only safe move is to say nothing. Silence becomes a shield. The designation as arguidos and the silence during the interrogation solidified the family secret. From that moment on, the war was no longer about finding Madeleine, but about clearing their names. They fled Portugal days later, returning to the UK, where their PR machine could operate at full force, portraying them as victims of an incompetent foreign police force. They won that war in the media. The arguido status was lifted a year later. Due to insufficient conclusive evidence, the world, little by little, bought the story of the persecuted couple. The secret seemed safe again, buried under layers of lawsuits, favorable news articles, and the passage of time. They built a fortress of silence and power around themselves, a fortress that seemed impenetrable for 16 years. Until, in 2023, a Polish girl with a phone in her hand unknowingly found the only weapon capable of shaking that fortress. She didn't use forensic evidence or witnesses. She used Madeleine's own image against them. And in doing so, she forced them to relive the original panic of 2007, the panic of being confronted with a truth they couldn't control. The question hanging in the air was, if Julia's hoax could generate so much panic, what would happen if, one day, the real Madeleine showed up at their door? The Julia Wendell phenomenon wasn't a frontal assault on the McCanns' fortress. It was a flank attack, one they never anticipated. She didn't come with lawyers or forensic evidence. She came with the most powerful weapon of the digital age, a meme. Her image side by side with Madeleine's, the coloboma in the eye, the subtle similarity in the smile. The internet did the rest. In days, millions of people weren't just commenting. They were believing. And that's when the panic set in. The McCanns' PR team, so efficient at destroying detectives' careers and suing newspapers, was paralyzed. Their strategy had always been to control the narrative. But how do you control a viral fire spreading across millions of phones? Suing Julia, a clearly vulnerable young woman, would be a PR disaster. Ignoring her was impossible, as the slogan, "I think I'm Madeleine McCann," dominated social media. They were trapped. For the first time in 16 years, they lost total control of Madeleine's image. Their daughter, who had become a sacred, untouchable symbol of their campaign, was being kidnapped again, this time by an algorithm. The climax of this story wasn't the result of Julia's DNA test. The climax was the McCanns' reaction before the result. The refusal to offer a DNA test, the cold statement from a spokesperson saying there was nothing to comment on, the couple's set to find their daughter, the appearance of someone who could be her, no matter how unlikely, should have triggered an immediate verification response. It was the only logical response for grieving parents. But they aren't just grieving parents. They are guardians of a secret. And Julia's hoax threatened that secret in a new and terrifying way. The renewed global attention wasn't focused on the abductor, but on Madeleine's identity. What if this new wave of investigation, even if sparked by a hoax, led to new questions? What if someone decided to re-examine the dog's evidence? What if a new journalist decided to investigate what really happened in apartment 5A? The McCanns' panic in 2023 wasn't fear of an imposter. It was the return of the repressed. It was the panic of 2007, the fear of exposure returning in full force. Julia's hoax was the mirror they were forced to face, and the reflection wasn't of a Polish girl, but of their own fear and the lie they've upheld for 17 years. The mask slipped, not because Julia tore it off, but because their panic made it slide. And for a moment, the world didn't see victim parents. It saw suspects. The DNA test proved Julia wasn't Madeleine. The media circus moved on. For most, the case was closed, a bizarre and forgettable chapter. But for those paying attention, the damage was done. Julia's hoax, in fading, left something permanent, the indelible image of the McCanns' panic. It's strange, isn't it? How a lie can sometimes reveal a much greater truth. I remember following the Julia case in real time, and what struck me wasn't her claim, but the collective sentiment that emerged in the comments, forums, and conversations. A silent question. Everyone seemed to be asking, if they were my parents, wouldn't they take the test immediately just to be sure? And that simple question, that break in expectation, was more powerful than any evidence. It connected us, as spectators, to the fundamental dissonance of the case. We felt in our gut that their reaction was wrong. This feeling has a name. In psychology, it's called complex trauma theory. It suggests that families harboring dark secrets, a death, a cover-up, don't live in the past. They live in a perpetual present, where the original trauma is always lurking. Every knock on the door, every unexpected phone call, could be the moment it all falls apart. Julia Wendell was a knock on the door, a very loud and insistent knock. Their reaction wasn't to her. It was to the constant fear that defines their lives. They aren't just hiding an event. They're managing an active trauma day by day. The deepest consequence of Julia's hoax was the humanization of the secret. Before, the family secret was a theory, an abstraction. After Julia, it became a visible feeling. We saw the panic in real time. We saw raw fear stripped of the PR armor. The hoax acted like a chemical reagent spilled on the perfect family photograph. The image began to corrode at the edges, revealing the darkness beneath. They may have won the legal battle against Gonzalo Amaral. They may have silenced the British media, but they couldn't control a young woman with a phone and a story. And in trying to protect themselves from her, they ended up exposing themselves in a way no investigation ever could. They showed us that the fortress they built around themselves wasn't to keep kidnappers out. It was to keep the truth in. The hoax is gone, but the crack in the fortress wall remains. And now the only question that matters is, what else could slip through that crack? The story that began with a simple question, why did the McCanns panic over Julia Wendell's hoax, now closes. The resolution isn't in the DNA result, but in the understanding that their panic was never about Julia. It was about what she represented, chaos, loss of control. And for a family whose only survival mechanism for 17 years has been absolute control of the narrative, loss of control is death. The character arc here is a tragedy. Kate and Jerry McCann aren't movie villains, they're tragic figures, trapped. In a web they wove themselves. Their journey wasn't a search for their daughter, but a perpetual flight from the truth. Every lawsuit, Every controlled interview, every attack on those who dared to doubt, wasn't an act of strength but of desperation. They weren't building a legacy, they were reinforcing the walls of a psychological prison. Julia's hoax didn't tear down the prison, but it illuminated the bars, showing the world that they are and always have been on the inside. The family secret, the monster locked in the basement, wasn't killed. But now we've heard its sound. The McCanns' panic was the echo of the monster stirring in the darkness. The resolution for us, as observers, is clarity. Julia's hoax, which seemed like a senseless distraction, became the final piece of the psychological puzzle. It gave us permission to believe what our instincts already told us. Their reaction was never that of innocent parents. The central conflict, the parents' narrative versus the evidence, resolves not with a confession, but with an involuntary exposure. They didn't tell us the truth, but they showed us the fear they have of it, and in that fear we found the most honest answer they've ever given. The locked door of apartment 5A remains sealed, but the panic Julia's hoax caused opened a crack, and through that crack, for the first time, we didn't see the image of an abductor, but the reflection of the fear of the guardians of that door. In the end, this entire story isn't just about an unsolved crime. It's about the weight of a secret. The playwright Eugene O'Neill, a master at dissecting family secrets, wrote that there is no present or future, only the past, happening over and over again now. The McCanns' panic in 2023 wasn't a new event. It was the panic of 2007 happening, again for the whole world to see. And that made me think about the impact these choices have on a human scale. Their family secret isn't a thought, it becomes a living entity. It dictates who can come into your home, what topics can be discussed at the dinner table, what questions can never be asked. It feeds on silence and grows in the darkness, poisoning everything around it. The McCanns' tragedy teaches us that trying to protect a lie ends up costing far more than facing the truth, no matter how terrible it is. The great lesson here is about the walls we build. The McCann family built the greatest PR wall in history, not to protect themselves from external threats, but to imprison themselves with their own secret, limiting any chance of real peace. The question that lingers, echoing long after the media noise fades, is one we can all ask ourselves. What are the great walls you're building in your life, and who are they really keeping from moving forward? In the end, my opinion on all this is that the truth has a weight, and when you refuse to carry it, it doesn't disappear. It simply seeps into the ground beneath your feet, rotting the foundation of everything you build on top. The McCanns aren't just fleeing from an event in 2007. They're fleeing from the inevitable collapse of a structure built on rotten ground. And Julia Wendell's hoax was the tremor that reminded us that this foundation is, and always has been, doomed to give way. And now, after all this, I really want to know what this story stirred in you. Do you believe the panic was the missing confession? Or was it just the reaction of exhausted, wrongfully accused parents? Write it in the comments. It can be just a line, but let it come from the heart. I'll read everyone. Because in the end, panic is the echo of the truth. And if you felt the weight of that secret, know that the story doesn't end here. The McCanns' secret was kept, not only by them, but by a circle of friends that top us 7. In our next video, we'll explore the silent wound that this pact of silence left in all of them. It's an invitation for those who want to understand the consequences of a loyalty taken too far. To not miss this continuation and to be part of a community that seeks the truth behind the narratives, subscribe to the channel. Every subscription is a sign that these stories, the ones that make us question, need to be told. And if you believe this analysis needs to reach more people, a super chat is the gesture that helps us keep this flame alive. Until next time, keep questioning.